I'd like to think I'm the person that doesn't play this game, the confirmation bias game. But everybody sort of does to different degrees. Depending on who it is will depend on whether you like them. You know, the greatest example at the moment of that is the kind of Elon Musk fanboy thing. I love Elon Musk. He's great, isn't he? He's a great defender. You know, never could there be a man who embodies globalism and research into the digital world more so than him, other than Bill Gates. Bill Gates, bad billionaire. Elon Musk, good billionaire. I mean, it's that, you know? And so I think when we come across a story of either tittle-tattle or allegations of pretty horrible behaviour, as in Gregg Wallace, I think the same kind of thing sort of applies. I was interested by the MP, Rupa Huq. Now, she's a member of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. She thinks that the BBC should pause, shouldn't even... It's on tonight, by the way, at 9 o'clock. I think there's a couple of episodes this week, and there is a Christmas special on the way, which, by the way, the BBC describes as expect fireworks and some great banter. I bet they regret putting that out on the press release. Now, I don't know whether Rupa Huq spoke out against grooming gangs and things like that, because I'd like to see someone quite... I'd like to see these voices that animated about that stuff more than I would about Gregg Wallace, to be honest. I mean, we're talking about voices that remain silent during an almost epidemic of industrial-scale child abuse over many, many years in lots of parts of the country. You know, we know about Rotherham, but I mean, this extends all over, north, south, east, west, you name it. And no reason to believe that some of it isn't still going on as well, which got a kind of a free rein. Nobody said anything about that. But a bloke from MasterChef tells a Bernard Manning gag on set and everyone loses their mind. So that was my position, really, on Friday last week. And I still stand by the idea that if this bloke has been inappropriate but hasn't been breaking any laws, then I don't want someone's career to finish. Now, everything I hear about Gregg Wallace is that he's not a particularly pleasant bloke to be around. And there are many people that have worked with him and said, I just didn't like him very much. I don't even think him and... Is it John Turode, the co-host? I don't even think they're mates either. I don't think they don't share a beer or go out together or go around each other. I think they've never been around each other's houses. They've worked together for 20 years. And by the way, that's fine. You know, we've all been in situations... Just because you work with somebody doesn't mean to say they have to be your best mate, but they've carved something out on the telly that clearly works, and it's a massive brand for the BBC and an incredibly valuable one as well. Don't lose sight of that little fact. So they do rather well together. Now, is he... kind of more of a Bernard Manning character? It's sort of the kind of... I think he's in that place. He's a 60-year-old bloke that grew up with Benny Hill and Carry On, and that's how I was seeing it. Now, since I made those comments, and exactly the same as Julia, I think there's a few other... I mean, there's 13 allegations that have come forward. And Mr. Wallace has got an idea of what he thinks, who the people are. I think we can have a little listen here, can't we, to just this moment where, despite the allegations against him, Gregg Wallace decided not to say, look, if I've upset anybody, I'm really sorry. I'll help out with any inquiry. He didn't say any of that. Instead, this is what he said.
Now, in the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef. This isn't right. In 20 years, over 20 years of television, can you imagine how many women, female contestants on MasterChef, have made sexual remarks or sexual innuendo? Can you imagine?
That's true. Didn't Mel and Sue used to do the Bake Off? Have I got that right? Amy, you know about cakes. Mel and Sue used to do the Bake Off, didn't they? And they were always making innuendos. But I think there's a very different thing about making an innuendo about a Black Forest Gatto or an iced fancy than there is about an individual. I don't think there's quite an equivalence there. What I want to know is, based on everything we know so far, can you defend Gregg Wallace 0344 499 1000. And I think there's a handful of middle-class women out there of a certain age that might well be best placed to answer that question. But the broader stuff, there are some suggestions that, because this is a guy who would take his top. Apparently he's quite well chiselled, is our Gregg, because he gets down the gym a lot. So he looks pretty good for a bloke in his 7th decade. So he does that sort of thing, talks about me and the missus last night, we couldn't stop, we were at it all night. It's that kind of stuff. This isn't pleasant, by the way. And if I was working with somebody like that, I would say, mate, can you give it a rest, please? I don't want to know about your sex life. I certainly don't want to know the finer details about what you find erotic or fanciable or what turns you. I don't want to hear that. You know, the Benny Hill show stopped 30 years ago. But there is a suggestion that one person has said that he groped a camerawoman, but as I understand it, no camerawoman has come forward to make that allegation. Somebody else has made that allegation, which is why they have an investigation. And the other thing was somebody who, I think a contestant kind of crouched down to, take something out the oven or whatever, and he sort of approached her and simulated something. Now that does step into new territory. Has he done something wrong? Yes, 100%. Can MasterChef continue? Yes, it can. Based on everything we know, I would suggest that Gregg Wallace is somebody you probably wouldn't want to work with. He would bore the life out of you. He's wildly inappropriate in lots of places. Do you know how many people I know in this industry who are wildly inappropriate for lots of different reasons, by the way? Inappropriateness works in many different ways. Do I want him to lose his career? Not based on what I know, but I can't defend some of the things that he's apparently done. 0344 499 1000. This shouldn't really be something we're talking about, but to me, it's not. This isn't a debate about, should MasterChef carry on? This is a wider debate about the sort of world we live in and what passes for being acceptable and what demonstrably passes as being unacceptable. And when something is unacceptable, should that always result in the loss of career? Tonight, MasterChef's going to be on the telly again. I'll tell you what, they won't have... If it goes... I'm wondering whether it's going to go out at all now, because this is the problem with these kind of stories. They have a sort of snowbally effect. They seem to get bigger and bigger, even if nothing new has been said. Will the BBC cut it? Will they re-edit it? Not so that he's not in it, but so that he's not in it very much. And I tell you what, I bet they're going through everything line by line at the moment. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Candice Holdsworth, the writer and broadcaster, is with us. Candice, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Nice to have you with us as ever. So as a female, and I think there might well be a gender kind of divide on how we view these things. What's your assessment of what we know about this Gregg Wallace character?
Yes, it's really interesting when he came out with that statement about middle-class women of a certain age. The first thing I thought was, oh, yes, this is like the whole Karen culture. It's just like, shut up, you old hag, basically, when any older woman dares to have an opinion or challenge somebody or enforce boundaries or rules or whatever. And then, they just get dismissed. And I thought that he was, overly defensive. I don't like cancel culture. I don't want to see the guy absolutely destroyed and witch hunted, but he's obviously not making himself into a sympathetic character. And, there are people like this, like you were talking about, you get difficult people like this that you work with, but, they might be talented, they might be doing good work, you're learning from them, you can sort of cope with them, but the power really goes to their head. You get people like that and they get a bit of power and they get a bit of fame and suddenly they become the most intolerable people in the world. I mean, these are people with no riz whatsoever. And that's why they end up talking about their sex life in front of people, because they're so deeply inappropriate.
It's kind of weird. Is the... I remember somebody telling me that they went to a dinner party and the son of the people, that it was quite a wealthy family, and the son was massively inappropriate in what he said. But it wasn't just sort of it wasn't really sexual, I don't think, at all. He was just inappropriate in lots of other ways, making bodily noises and saying things, swearing quite a lot. There was people in the group that wouldn't have liked that, but this guy didn't care. So inappropriateness works in lots of different ways, I suppose. And I was trying to think in 20 years, which is roughly how long MasterChef has been going, what Wallace is arguing here is that you know, there's 13 things I'm meant to have said that are offensive in 20 years. Could we all think of 13 comments we've come out with in 2 decades that we wish we hadn't, of whatever nature? And we probably could all match that, couldn't we?
Yes, and also, you know, there is this sort of, it's after the fact. So, I mean, these are allegations from a long time ago, and it's almost like people overcompensate for the inaction at the time. So they probably went along to get along. They didn't challenge the guy when they probably should have, and there was a risk, and they should have said something, and then they possibly could have changed the culture.
Yeah.
They do it years and years and years later when there's very little cost to them, and then people really pile in, like they're piling in now.
I wonder if he'd have been better, though, releasing an Instagram post. Not, I mean, the middle-aged women, middle-class women of a certain age, kind of probably wasn't his finest moment. Would he have been better just going, look, I don't recognise any of this. Yeah, I'm a little bit kind of saucy with my humour sometimes, never mean any harm by it, and if I've upset anybody, I'm sorry, but I will help any inquiry that happens, and I'm absolutely confident nothing's going to be found. That's what he should have said, isn't it?
It's what he should have said, but is it in his personality to do that?
No, I don't think it is.
You know, some people just will not think like that. I mean, they will not self-reflect. They will just think it's your fault, not my fault. You're the one who's got the issues. You're too sensitive.
Yeah. Let's move on to another story, Candice. This is about, well, ultimately the legalisation of cannabis. Police in the UK believe that cannabis has essentially been decriminalised. Let's take a listen to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, speaking about legalisation. This is back in 2022. He was visiting a cannabis dispensary in LA. Here's what he said.
I think we need to have an honest, open conversation about the evidence in relation to the issue of cannabis, and whether our laws in the UK, whether our experience of the health consequences in relation to crime, consequences in the community.
Well, that's what he said. 66% of police officers, Candice, believe cannabis use is practically permissible on Britain's streets.
Yes. Yeah, I think we can all say that from anecdotal evidence. I mean, it's been going on for years. I mean, people have said it's effectively decriminalised, but now I think certain parts of London, other big cities all around the world, and there's just open use of it in the streets. I think I used to take a more libertarian attitude when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I think more realism has set in, especially when you see, like I said, these sort of open drug cultures with lots of addiction and crime involved with them, and the mental health issues. I mean, the psychosis that's linked to chronic cannabis use now. I just find it irresponsible that Sadiq Khan's talking about that, particularly the evidence of what we know now is going on. I think a lot of us sort of think about, you know, this sort of thing in like the 60s, people experimenting, having fun, but I think like cannabis use is actually taking a bit of a darker turn these days.
I sense that, and you know, there seemed to, you're absolutely right, and I kind of share that assessment as well, that I would have been the first to go, look, just legalise all of it, you know, because it's clearly the current system isn't working. I think now that some countries in the world have taken that step, I'm not absolutely sure the results are quite as liberal and as optimistic as they thought they were going to be.
Yes, and I think you have to go on the evidence, right? Deal with the material reality, not what you think should be happening. I mean, I'm still not sure whether you criminalise both supply and demand. So do you criminalise addicts and drug dealers, or do you just have strong penalties for people who deal drugs and then maybe treatment options for people who are addicted? Because a lot of people who work in the prison system say a lot of those people, they just tend to be addicted to drugs, and it's actually a waste of time and resources putting them in prison. You'd be better served treating them rather for their addiction, because the addiction then leads to them doing other things which they should be punished for. And it's difficult. I don't know how tough to be on people who have those sorts of issues.
Indeed. Where do you go in terms of the sort of judicial approaches to those kind of issues? That's a whole other minefield.